My name is Michael Ashanti Alston. I'm 71 years old. I live in the city of Providence, Rhode Island. My place of birth is Plainfield, New Jersey. I am the baby in the family. I got two brothers and two sisters. Mother, father, and grandmother. We all, same household. Plainfield. I mean, which requires knowing something about Plainfield. Plainfield is a small city. But it's black community is clearly delineated, and we grew up in that black community. Um, Religious family. I mean, not extreme religious, but my father at some point was a minister in church, but I also before he became a minister, our family was members of a Hebrew Israelite church. So that has always been, I mean, in our upbringing. But also is the same time like so different from now. Like the neighborhood was all our playground. It was like you could roam around. You got friends all over the place, and I'm saying it now because it's so different the way that we raise our kids now. And I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and it's like, man, you escort them places. You don't let them. They can't roam the neighborhood. But we had that. And so we knew everybody in the neighborhood, So that was always something that has stuck with me in terms of I think what makes me a social, I feel like I'm a real social person, real people person. And plus my father too. It's like being a minister. He was always that type of minister, and my family was always that type. We always had people around, whether it was family or it was friends or neighbors. It was always a lot of interaction. And even speaking about it now, I miss it, but now it becomes a goal, and like my political visions, like the world we want, I want that kind of community back. Yeah. So, coming up, this was during the 60s. This is where I feel like the 60s became so important. You had all the civil rights movement, you had the Black Power movement, you had all these rebellions going on. And even as a teenager, it was me trying to understand it. And you get a sense of what it's about that, we have to fight, we have to march, we have to protest. But then you do have the voices of like Malcolm X. And I mean, honestly, I don't remember like even when Malcolm got killed, I would have been like maybe 10, 11 years old, maybe. I remember more of Martin Luther King, but by the time of the rebellion, 67, now I'm like 13, 14, you begin to hear like recordings of Malcolm X. You begin to hear the voices of people like Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown and Black Power. And those was the voices that I started the things they said resonated more. So when Plainfield Rebellion happened in 67, and the people in the black community was able to um, they raided a gun manufacturing place and brought back crates of M1 rifles and actually ran the police out for a period of probably a week. It was liberated territory. It was black folks like really protecting each other and that camaraderie. It was a sense of camaraderie, and that has such an impact on me. And I felt like if I'm gonna be in this struggle, in this movement, for however we define it, the rights of black people, liberation of black people, black power, I want to be on that more stand up, fight back. I want to be in them kind of ranks. So that was, by the time I'm 14 years old, I feel like that has been where I've been at. I've been this revolutionary, this I sometimes I don't like to use the word activist, so I can say revolutionary. We're fighters for our people and stuff. But early on, joining the Panthers stuff, we had a chapter, and I guess this might fit into career because that's been my career. It's like we was organizing. We had a Panther chapter. We was doing a free breakfast program. We was active in the streets, selling the newspaper. We had a liberation school in the high schools. We're like, um, I guess, trying to raise consciousness. We talking with people about what's going on and how we got to organize, all like that. And at a certain point, we got a chapter, Black Panther chapter. But then at a certain point, a cop gets killed in our hometown, and they get the two main organizers. It happened to have been me and my one of my closest comrades to this day, you know, and they arrested us. And so after that, it was us families trying to get lawyers, and we got lucky and had good lawyers that were able to show that this was a classic. But for me and my closest comrade, we were still in this. This wasn't like this traumatic thing here and facing the death penalty. We still took that as no, we're in this struggle. We're going to keep on. And I mean, that's the short version of it. I talk about it more in other times, but it was very foundational because the Panthers also gave me space to learn political theory, political analysis. What is Black power? What is nationalism? What is socialism? What is communism? What is dialectical materialism and historical materialism? And why are we reading Mao Zedong's Red Book, and all this other stuff? For me, it was exciting because at the same time that we're in the community organizing and stuff, that we're learning. If that's praxis, that's praxis. It's like at the same time that we're learning, we're doing, and we see the effects of bringing people together. So I think those things stay with me today, to this day. So yeah, so it's like this kid who sees protests, because then I mean everybody gathered around the television. We ain't had about 3-6 channels, so civil rights movement, all the protests and things going on, stuff about the Vietnam War. You're gonna see all this stuff. And you never know who is going to start impacting. At some point, it definitely was impacting me, especially, with the civil rights movement. And you see them water hosing the police and the state water hosing people down the street. You hear the voices of the main leaders, of course, Martin Luther King and stuff. And it has some impact on you, but it's in a real general sense. But now I'm getting older, into my teens. And man, there's people starting to talk about Malcolm X. And I think one of them was my brother, my oldest brother. And then there you would hear these recordings, which was on cassettes at the time and whatnot. Or in the community, it was always a Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam was always a place you could go and hear an anti-racist critique of the United States. And sometimes I would go. Sometimes me and my friends would go, so things they were saying would make sense in terms of the racism in this country and what this country has done to people of African descent. And though I wasn't a great reader, it just kept adding on to, or maybe connecting the dots between what we've been going through and our whole history in this country and how we got here and what we continue to go through. And man, this society, the racism ain't gonna change. So are we gonna fight back? And it always came to be a thing between integration and political power, and sometimes I think the newspapers would take political power as separation, but the voices were, we need to control our own destiny. We needed self-determination. So I started reading Black Power by Stokely Carmichael. At some point, I came across H. Rap Brown's book, Die Nigga Die, you know, and this is all still going through junior high into the high school, you know. And then, man, when that rebellion jumped off, I think that was the point where I made serious decision about where my life was going to go. So there was a community center, and that you go to the community center right down the street, and here's some of the people that was involved in the rebellion and others who was always trying to get you to raise that consciousness. And now you can sit in meetings and you can ask questions or you can just listen. And there was always material around. So I found myself reading and reading more. And it was just so happened that me and my best friend, some point we were walking somewhere, and it was a magazine stand outside of the store, and it had, I don't know if it was Newsweek, I forget which one it was, but it had a picture of Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. Black beret, black leather jacket. One had a pistol, one had a rifle. And we were like, whoa, who are they? What is that? And our curiosity took us to my best friend Jihad, to his father. And his father was just as curious. So we would get in the car and we go to find the local Black Panther chapters. And just so happened in Jersey, there was quite a few. So it was like Plainfield to Newark, Plainfield to Jersey City, Plainfield to Harlem, or to the Bronx. And we could go there, we can ask the questions, and they always would give you literature to read or give you the newspaper. And you would see that they do these programs, the free breakfast program, the free clothing program, the free medical clinics, always, involved with the anti-war movement and stuff. And we were like, man, we want to do stuff like this in our hometown. So after a while, they asked us, is this what we wanted to do? And if so, they would give us help with doing that. And we like, yes, we want a chapter in our hometown. And they gave us the support we needed to do it. So because this is the Black Panther Party, Marxist, Leninist, not only Black power, Black self-determination, but Marxist, Leninist, Mao, all of that stuff, we find ourselves in study groups where we're learning, scientific socialism. We're learning like the basics of the Communist Manifesto. Then we get into like Maurice Cornforth, the dialectical method in historical materialism. So all these things was like really powerful, especially in I think dialectical materialism and stuff, because it was also teaching us ways to analyze this society. And of course, Karl Marx's book has given you this in-depth analysis of capital, where you can see the relevance to the United States as a capitalist nation. It may not have given us what we needed in terms of racism, but we were already on top of that from reading the documents of our own theoretical people, whether it was W.B. Du Bois, or whoever, so it helped us to bring different analysis together. So for me, someone who's, I love to read, I love to read, I learn from different perspectives. That stuff was like setting me on fire. So now, to the point where I could identify as being a Marxist Leninist, as being someone who wanted to create a socialist society or even a communist society, and then you're reading Lenin and all that other stuff, and you get this idea of a vanguard party, political party of revolutionaries, and stuff like this. And that was how the Black Panther Party saw itself. So for all of that time in there, and this is like from 16, 17, I would imagine to at least in my early 20s, and at this time I'm already in prison. I identified as a Marxist-Leninist, as a Maoist, fighting for that kind of, society, always through the lenses of the Black Panther Party. So we were not traditional Marxist-Leninists. We looked at the lumpen proletariat. We didn't look at the proletariat as the vanguard, the working class, and all that stuff. We had a different critique, which I totally agreed with, that Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver put forth, but still really rooted in that kind of Marxist-Leninist perspective. So this was all, I got captured in 74. But this time, this was for bank expropriation. So I'm in the federal system. And it was up until them points there, my early years in the federal system, that started to discover some other readings, which was going to lead me into more anti-authoritarian anarchist thinkings. And a lot of that was reading critical theory, reading feminism, reading, basically them two. I'm trying to think if there was a third one, but I ain't going to remember. But so it was all during this time, and to the point where I felt like there's some things that the anarchisms and the anti-authoritarianisms was bringing out that made clearer to me some of our own failings and why we were defeated, why we could not carry out our mission and in collaboration with all these other different movements. So victory, whether we're dealing with the empire or worldwide, because we did definitely feel like we was in a worldwide struggle with so many different people, But I mean, I can stop it there, but that's it in the gist. So it's funny because, when I reflect back, when I am a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, I really feel its power. I really feel like it is the way to go. And it's encouraging when you see other movements around the world who are beginning to take on a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist approach. But when you're reading Marxist, Leninist canon, the main literature, none of it is quite friendly to the anarchists, But this is at the time too, where the only thing you're really reading is the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist stuff. So when you read them talking about the anarchists, it's always negative. It's always a really harsh critique. And you kind of follow that. The thing that in reflection that I always noticed that I never independently went and got their literature to read it on my own and make my own decision. It wasn't until in prison, So it's like all this time that I feel the relevance of the Marxist-Leninist approach. It wasn't until I'm in prison, and that being in prison, regardless of the fact that it's in prison, you do now have a time to reflect. You want to know, why is it that you even in prison? What happened, to the movement that even led you to being in prison? Because this is at this point, this is like the early 70s. And this is at this point too, where the counterintelligence program and the internal weaknesses of so many of our movements just led to our demise, And I'm really clear in reflection as well that what was happening to us internally was the real problem. the counterintelligence program, local police department, all them other things, even the CIA, when you see their involvement, they do what they're supposed to do. That's what their assignment is to stop revolutionary movements, stop all this stuff. They're good at it. They've been doing it for a while. But me being able to be in prison now, and I wanted to know, like, what happened in the Black Panther Party? What happened that we had this split, which was around democracy within the Black Panther Party? What happened when we put Huey and them on a pedestal and no one can make criticism? What happened? What was our real relationships like between men and women? What was the relationship like between local chapters and the Central Committee? I needed something to give me a different way to look at it. And it wasn't until I was sitting in prison and there was some others that I guess was already on that path of looking critically at our own mistakes. Like, oh, why don't you check this out? Why don't you check that out? And some of that literature happened to have been anarchist or anti-authoritarian. But even before then, I was already reading feminist stuff. I was already reading critical theory. I was already reading some of the more radical psychoanalysts who came out of the Freud group. Wilhelm Reich being one of the main ones, Eric Fromm and others, who were offering some different insights from a psychoanalytical perspective. I'm like, oh shit. I think it was more in line. It made me think of Frantz Fanon, but he's hard to understand, But now it had me thinking back on all the stuff we read with Frantz Fanon, like we have internalized so much of this empire that we just was trying to just push it forward through ideological correctness, purity, and all this other shit, or the right organizational forms with the vanguard in front. That was not good enough. And so then later, when I did start reading more of the anarchist stuff, and they're sending us, I would get their newspapers. Some people would send the pamphlets if they could get in. You would find some material already in the prisons. I had time to really read it. And now it's like hierarchy. Now it's like even reading the surrealists and other folks like that, it kept showing me that if we don't deal with that cultural aspect that makes us want authority, we lose. Eric Fromm's book was was it Fear of Freedom? It was something like that kind of title. And when I read that, because I was reading at a certain point, reading everything I get on Eric Fromm, everything I get on Wilhelm Reich. But I wanted to understand more of the psychological depths of our oppression. And if you're going to do that, you can't keep repeating a hierarchical structure, a cultural fortified structure that makes you just want to give up your own dynamics, your own creativity, your own person, your own, way of being in this world, that you can be an equal participant in this too. It doesn't necessarily have to be anti-leadership, but it definitely can't be where you just submit to being obedient and have no understanding of why. You had accepted that there must be that kind of top leader, and you are the flunky, you are the pawn on the bottom. You must carry out, the correct analysis, of the Central Committee and that kind of proper relationship. And then at this point too, and this would be the 80s, the chance to see what the results of all these revolutions and liberation struggles were that were supposed to be successful. Now I'm able to see that not near one of them was successful. It just replaced one oppressive class for another. It's just that the new one had revolutionary rhetoric, So it was disappointing. But for me, it's like, well, this ain't over. We just want to make sure that we do better, that we do differently. So at this point in the prisons where I'm really reading now, I'm reading everything I can get. And also one of the big influences was in Wilhelm Reich. It was a group in California called Wellspring Collective, and that saw itself as pretty much putting into practice a lot of Wilhelm Reich's theories. And a lot had to do. One of his main books was Mass Psychology of Fascism. Another one was The Function of the Orgasm, and others. Now I'm reading everything, character analysis. But Function of the Orgasm and Mass Psychology, it was like he gave you an understanding of the cultural impact of fascism, or just top control of the bottom, and he himself, coming out of Freud's school, he saw himself as more of a revolutionary, and he wanted to make some of them psychoanalytical teachings accessible to the working class in Germany. So at some point he joined what was the Social Democratic Party, which I think was the Communist Party at the time. But he specifically went to working class areas. What he wanted was to be able to develop ways of working class organization that would counter that fascist mindset that we all come up in, male society, what you do, how the culture just automatically starts to corral the life energy of people, and prevents it from being free. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, that whole thing around sexuality and the that desire to be who you want to be. I think we need to be heading there. I think we need to stop reproducing cadre in a sense. So I moved there, and the group in California, Wellspring Collective, at least showed me how they were doing it in practice. So now there was the anarchist ideas. It was there was liberated sexuality and integrated into it. Still learning from the feminists, the radical feminists, and even seeing the differences into feminists of color and white feminists and stuff. But still, there's this thing about we got to do something about man. So yeah, there's capitalism, but then there's man. So can these struggles be integrated? Can it not just be a class struggle? Can it not just be, we're fighting one phase of this that we're now putting up as the center, when there's all kind of different phases? So that's the thing I wanted to see, and then by the time it comes to the end of my time, I went in at 1974, I came out at 85, 86, 1986. I know I'm an anarchist. A little bit hesitant to say it once I'm out, but I'm still searching for what's the anarchist groups around. And one of the ones I found was Love and Rage. And Love and Rage was definitely multicultural, multiracial. But I've told the story before, at first it was a little hard because the white folks in there, like hair, all kind of other things going on, the rings, and whoa, what is this? Oh no, I don't know. And it's funny because I'm coming out of prison, and I've been in there 11 years. And this is like, okay, but I want to learn. So I do develop a relationship. I do attend some of the meetings. I never became a member, but I developed a close relationship with them. I want to see how they put anarchism into practice. And when I would go to a meeting, it'd be simple stuff like just asking, if the people introducing themselves, just not only say who you are, but how you doing? And then later on, it's like, not only how you doing, but what pronouns do you use? Oh shit. And then if you're there for a particular project, they will have a big sheets of paper. And when they go around, they want everyone's input into whatever this project is. And it really made me feel like, man, they really want everyone's input. And I'm sure, like me, there was people who, like, I've never been really asked for my opinion before. It had always been given to me by the fucking leadership. So it was these things that kept like, yes, I want to keep on, I want to keep learning about this anarchist thing with the ultimate goal, like I want it in the Black community, you know. And at some point, this is when we'll get to the K-pop anarchist people of color and all like that. But so and I say that because all of that, even from the early days Black Power movement, I realized I got to be open to learning. I know that I can't get stuck. And I felt like that was my anarchism. That was anarchism as well. You know, when I would see the examples of anarchist movements and stuff, it's like to get to a point where whatever the old forms were, you realize that you got to do different. If you're going to do different, that means you got to let go of some of the old ways you had kind of accepted. And that part of the anarchism always resonated with me. Be open, be willing to be surprised, even. But if you want to win, look at the things you do that limit your own potential power. And some of that came from watching Chinese Revolution or the African Asian Latin American liberation struggles, because it was that thing about women hold up half the sky, which was that effort to include women, to where you would see that in the liberation struggles, women are really stepping forward into all kind of leadership positions, whether it was the guerrilla warfare or in decision-making bodies. And I saw some of that in the Panther Party happening. It's just that we didn't last long enough. But I know that if I was going to be a part of any groups, I want us to be able to create that kind of space too. Now, one thing that even when I do talk, I tell people when I speak at the liberation movements of China, Cuba, Russian, I look at what they did to the women after they had so-called victories. It disarmed them and put them right back in their place. Yeah. And one can only imagine, because back then, queer and all that other stuff wasn't even on your mindset. So I can imagine what happened with them back then too. And then, a few decades later, coming into nouns and stuff, you can see what they did. And you can see now, because there's much more of an ecological consciousness, even these so-called revolutionary societies are still on a hyper-industrialization thing. So what the fuck are you doing to the planet? So be open, be open. You cannot get stuck. And I'm saying that, which might be answering some of them other questions, but that is my anarchism. We got to constantly be learning. We have to constantly see blind spots, so that we really are developing in ways that we can create liberated lives, or in the course of bringing this empire down, that we really can build the kind of free societies that just tells us, yeah, it's possible to do. It just requires so much more from us than we thought that we had to give. This is not just pay your dues, join the organization, pay your dues. A lot of this is really opening up to different people's worldviews, realities, experiences, and sitting down in the course of the struggle face to face to figure out what is it that we do want. So just a quick example on that is like, I just came from the socialism conference in Chicago. I recognize the importance of class analysis. If that's your organization and that's the thing that's like key for you, then I already feel like you ain't talked to no indigenous people, no indigenous nations. And one of my comrades, Kiki, would say, you ain't talked to the trees, you ain't talked to none of the other living things to get a sense of what are you doing? Just because you say you want socialism, are you ignoring all the specific realities of this experience here on Turtle Island? So what kind of society are you talking about? Or what kind of thinking are you using that can ignore, other people's experiences? Indigenous folks, this is their land. African folks, for the most part, we came in slave ships, but we didn't come here by choice. How can you just pick up material now from Europe and all that good, great stuff, Marx, all this, human do, but you're going to declare what this is going to be without being in constant consultation with other people's experience that your privileged place doesn't see. So my anarchism is constantly challenging even old classical anarchism, definitely challenging Marxisms and the other stuff like that, but that we have to keep challenging. We have to keep seeing that we may well have put ourselves in a certain box that we now have to come out of. So let the anarchism keep growing. Let it keep expanding. Let it keep going in areas that we never assumed they would go in. That's anarchy, anarchic. It's not just whatever Bakunin say, whatever Emma Goldman did, whatever the Spanish Civil War did, whatever the Mexican Revolution did with all those folks. We have to do something that is about this period we're in now. Well, I can talk about like what it meant for anarchist people of color to come about that conference, which would have been early. It would have been, I think, 2003, which was the first one. And that one coming about as a challenge to the anarchist movement in the United States, which was still significantly white, even though I do think Love and Rage did a lot and the groups like them to start breaking that down, but it was folks of color feeling like we needed something for us. And like someone like a Lorenzo Camboa Irvin, was so instrumental, especially when he put his book out, Anarchism and the Black Revolution, which was giving us a different way to look at a specific kind of anarchism that was not classical, but that was specifically dealing with our lived experience. So we were finding that people all over were open to the idea of some kind of organizational forms that would bring us together. And so 2003 was that first conference in Detroit. I think about 200 people came out, man, and it was just so great. And one of the things that I think was so significant about it is that a large percentage of these anarchists of color who came out were queer, And it was like, wow, I think even for me, that was like really eye-opening. And with that, then it was like, okay, can we figure out how we want to organize? And even if it was not under one umbrella. And I think out of that, you would start to see more APOC type groups developing in different cities, different towns, and there was many conferences or regional conferences happening. But definitely it had opened up a space that was surely needed. It may have been periods where um, maybe it's like there was a certain spike in a lot of activity. There was certain down points. Um, but there was always a presence and a growing presence, actually, of anarchists from different of communities like the Chicano community, Black community, the Puerto Rican community, the indigenous communities, and then us finding that there was certain anarchist groups in other countries and stuff like that. Now that internet now is happening where people are connecting. Um, there may have been a low period too, but I think what I'm seeing now, and this may have been because I had gone through a long period of depression, maybe about 15 years, but in the last year, places where I have spoke, these young folks, mainly of color, are coming up to me like, we stay in touch. Um, can we figure out some way to talk so that we can see how we want to go forward? And in the absence of specific kinds of organizations, people would generally just go towards any organization in the community that seems to be doing some good community work. But the experience in them has been a little disappointing when it comes to being seen, being heard, because a lot of times there's the hierarchy. If it's in the Black community or other even other communities, different communities too, there's the sexisms and the heterosexisms, and there's the comments that are definitely anti-queer and stuff. So they're like heartbroken. But I think in the last year, what I've been seeing is I think it's a new resurgence. And I'm sure that knucklehead Trump and all of them got a lot to do with it. And okay, right on. And it's just with the hope this time that we can figure out different ways with an S that we can be a part. If we continue to be a part of the groups we're in, right on. And if we feel like we might need our own formations for specific reasons, then right on to that too. But that's the things that I'm hearing more now, and I think it's really good. It keeps me feeling hopeful because I feel like the anarchists in general and the anarchists of color are more attuned to bullshit, if I may. So when Obama runs for president or Kamala Harris runs for president, I just feel like anarchists are like, oh, why are we doing this? Or you got another Supreme Court person that's of color. Come on, y'all. Let's stop doing this. Oh, this person is running for mayor, this Black person, or this Palestinian person. Like, come on, y'all. So that kind of anarchist consciousness that says, yo, this is about the people. This is about the people and not the politicians. If they're doing anything, it's to fortify their positions. They are going to fortify this empire. Can we not do that? And I think that's the thing I'd be hearing more. And I think that even, especially on that level of the sexisms and the anti-queer stuff, I think that this is that time that it can be challenged even within our local or regional or nationalist communities. This is that time. And that's what I think I'm hearing more. Even at in Chicago, the socialism conference is definitely a Marxist leaning conference. But I was there with uh, the sister Kiki. Kiki's book just came out. Which is Palestine 1492. It was me, her, and Muhammad Abdu. And Muhammad Abdu, whose book just came out last year, the year before, which is Islam and Anarchism. And what they offered, and I'm so happy that they allowed me to be a part of it, what they offered was using 1492 as the key moment of what became the creation of this Western world, and how it started with the exclusion of even European Jews or the Jews in Spain and Muslims, but how they use that as the creation of this new world with Columbus traveling and all this other stuff. They're saying that that's the starting point. That's the war. And in fact, they use two different expressions. That's the war where all wars fit. And our job is more like not the Palestinians, the Zapatistas. We need to create a world where all worlds fit all peoples, So one is the one from above, and one other one is from the people from below, the struggles from below. And that's why also it's really great too. And like, it's so deep into, you don't get fooled by the nation states that may say they support the Palestinians. If they're nation states, they're going to be consistent to doing what nation states do. They're going to be consistent in doing what empires do. So even if it's an Arab nation that's doing that talk around the Palestine, you can be sure that they're going to backstab the Palestinians, because they're about nation states, which are about empire, which are about power and riches and controlling the resources. So I like that. I think it is so valuable. So it's another sense why the anarchism has to change. It can't just keep drawing on the canon. It's got to continually be open to nuances, to new perspectives, new analysis, new practices. That was the Zapatista. It was definitely a new practice, even, but it gives us a way to see that, our liberation has to continually be led by insights and analysis that keep us open, that allow us to see blind spots. And Muhammad Abdu would talk about the micro-fascism, and I talk a lot about, like, if you're dealing with the Panthers or so many others, counterintelligence program did what they're supposed to do, but we didn't look at how we were harming each other by cultural shit that we did not deal with in a righteous way. Whether we didn't have the understandings or the tools. Okay, but now we do, or at least we got some that can be affected. But if we don't, we will replicate the very oppression that, in our best intentions, we want to destroy so that we can live. But if you don't deal with shit that comes out in the way that we treat each other, what's the point? Yeah. So the last thing too was just around Muhammad Abdu's Islam and anarchism. You would think from the title that this is for Muslims, but he wrote this thing in such a brilliant way. It is open for anyone to learn from, to the point where not only did he use anarchist lenses to show how Islam can be amenable to an anarchist struggle or anarchist society, but he highlights a politics of ethics very strongly, so strongly that it just makes so much sense. Whatever you're about, it should be able to also show and how we relate to each other, how we sit down, break bread together, how we show up for each other in times of crisis, or whether it's personal or political or whatever, How do we show up? And that's like some of the main points that he makes in his. So things like that keep me hopeful that anarchisms with a S will continually help us to move forward because they will help us to see the blind spots. But you hear a lot of decolonial stuff, and you still see a lot of fantastic works coming from the radical feminists, the Black feminists, the womanist theologians, the Christian theologians, the Buddhist theologians, and others. So that spirituality part, becomes important again. All of this, has to be factored into what kind of society we want. And I feel like the anarchisms is in the best position to play a part in the pushing them kind of concerns forward. Yeah. Thank you for doing this. I looked at the questions and they seem simple, but then they're not really. But I appreciate that you give me the time to like open up. Sometimes I don't get a chance to open up like have you asked me. I really appreciate it. I think you doing that and you doing that with others, those of us who are older anarchists, I think it's going to bring out a lot of things that are really important. I think that in the last couple of years, there's been such a hunger for intergenerational. And I'm always like telling people, like back in the 60s and 70s, we was too angry at the older generation. We didn't want to have nothing to do with them. But now we're here, and it's important that we do have intergenerational connection. And my only thing with the intergenerational connections is that us older folks recognize that we ain't doing this to be the leaders. We're sharing. We're sharing. Y'all don't need us as leaders. If we were such great leaders, we wouldn't have been in the city we're in now. Well, you know what I'm saying? But we're here. And those mistakes that we made, we just need to be honest about them and trust y'all, because y'all really do understand a lot more in many ways than we did. So the world we want, we can create it. I ain't hung up on what we call it. I think it's got to be a conversation. But we want to get rid of empire. We want to get rid of capitalism. We want to get rid of all the other negative isms, whether it's dealing with sexuality, ageism, abilities, whatever. We know what we want to get rid of. We got to do this together, and we got to find a ways to do it together, and be open to that kind of excitement and mystery. Let's do this. We know what we don't want. So let's keep coming together and let's figure it out.